Good morning and welcome to the Norfolk Records Committee. My name is Lane Tisdall. I'm a committee officer with Democratic Services at Norfolk County Council. Before we continue with this meeting, I will just go over some general housekeeping. This meeting is being held in person at County Hall and is also being streamed live on the County Council's YouTube channel. The recording will also be able to be viewed afterwards. Under the Council's protocol of the use of media equipment at meetings held in public, this meeting may be filmed, recorded or photographed. Anyone wishing to do so must inform me and ensure that it is done in a way that is clearly visible to anyone present. The wishes of any individual not to be recorded or filmed must be appropriately respected. A fire alarm test is not expected during this meeting. If the alarms sound, we must evacuate County Hall. In the event of an emergency, please make your way to the nearest exit and meet at the muster point, which is located on the main car park. That brings us to item 1 on our agenda, which is apologies and substitutions. I can confirm I've not received any apologies at all for this meeting, so I think that might be a first. Which means we can launch into item 2 on our agenda, which is election of chair for the 2026-27 municipal year. Do I have any nominations for chair? Yes, Councillor Huntley.
Thank you. Can I propose Councillor Kybird, please?
Thank you. And do you have a seconder? Yes, Councillor Nurden. Do I have any further nominations for chair? I'm not seeing any further nominations. Is the committee in agreement that Councillor Robert Kybird is elected chair of the Norfolk Records Committee? That looks pretty unanimous to me, so thank you, Councillor Kybird. You are duly elected chair of the Norfolk Records Committee. What I would propose now is just to take a short adjournment of about 5 minutes just to make sure Robert is up to date with everything, and then we will resume with our agenda. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, and thank you to the committee for supporting me in the role of chairman of this committee. The next agenda item is the election for a vice chair. I think traditionally that would need to be a county councillor, but we're not 100% sure on that. But do I have any nominations? Grant.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I nominate Councillor Malcolm Latosh?
Are there any other nominations? Oh, do we have a second of Councillor Latosh? Catherine, thank you. Are there any other nominations? There are none. So is it the wish of this committee that Councillor Latosh be elected vice chair? Could I have? Yes, that's an agreed. So welcome, Malcolm. Thank you. At this point, oh, yes.
So I don't know if it's the appropriate time, but I just wanted to record my condolences to the family, friends and colleagues of Michael Chenery of Horsborough, who was our previous
that was
chair.
going to be my...
That was, right.
That was going to be item 3A.
Thank you.
So as certainly previous members and most councillors are aware that Michael Chenery died suddenly a few weeks ago, and whilst he had been chairman for this committee for nearly 10 years, I think my first time I met Michael was as a member of Health Scrutiny in about 2009, and it wasn't until being jointly on this committee that you got to know what a wonderful character he was and what a walking encyclopedia of the great and the good. But I would ask members now to just stand for a minute's silence. Are there any other members who would like to pass tribute to Michael? Catherine? And
Thank
Saul.
you, Chair. Yes, I would just like to add, I was only on the committee, I've only been on here for 3 years. I hadn't realised he'd been on here for 10 years, I must say, but it was always such a welcoming committee. He always ran it very smoothly and with great humour, and clearly had a love for the Record Office and archives and real deep interest in it. So, yeah, very, very sad loss, and he was just such a welcoming and friendly person, and be sorely missed.
Thank you. Saul?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and congratulations on your appointment. It's the easiest election you'll ever fight, I'm sure. Just to echo your tributes to Michael and the words that have been said, he was a wonderful chairman, full of good humour, grace, very fair. He once suggested to me that it would be a good idea if I proposed we have wine at the meetings, and he would second that, which was, you know, typical Michael. A really good idea, actually, Michael. So I'd like to just pay my personal tribute to him and send my condolences to his family at this difficult time for them, and also to convey the sympathy and thoughts of North Norfolk District Council, which I now represent here on this committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Ben.
Thank you, Chair, and congratulations. Yeah, I do feel compelled to say a few words. I felt Michael was an amazing chair. It was a you know, a charismatic character, and I think, you know, in politics we've lost a lot of characters, and so, you know, he really sort of stood out in this chamber as the chair, and even when he would move the reports at full council, you know, he put a smile on everyone's face, and he was fair, and he was a good person to work with, and I think that's an important thing to remember in politics, is that we might have political representations, but actually we're all people underneath, and it's about connecting as people. And so, you know, we had a conversation just after the last committee, and you know, and sadly he lost his seat. He was unfortunate in not retaining his seat, but you know, we spoke of meeting up again, and we were hopeful to meet up again, and that was the last time we spoke. So that was, it was sad to say goodbye on that, and I'll always remember, you know, that he would talk fondly about my surname and its Welsh roots, and we would joke about being the Prince of North Wales and such things. He's the Baron, I guess I'm the Prince. But I do want to pass on the condolences to his family. You know, that this chamber and this county have lost a real character in local politics, and I put forward the representation of Norwich City Council's condolences as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Charles.
Thank you, and congratulations on your election again. I'd echo all that's been said, and as members who have been on this committee for a while, and Michael elsewhere will know that he was a person of deep Christian faith, but just as his work as a councillor crossed political divides, so he was very generous to those from other branches of the Christian church and of other faiths and none, but he took a particular interest in the work of this committee and of the Record Office in being the custodian of records from Church of England churches and other churches. I didn't know a huge amount about Michael, although occasionally I saw him outside this meeting, where he was always gregarious and very generous with his time. But when he died, I looked him up on the internet and, among other things, found his attendance record at council meetings, which is remarkably high, and also a lot of testimony to how he took great care for the people who had elected him, and indeed those who had not elected him. And I think that all those he served as a councillor would say that he was careful and caring in his work as a councillor, as well as being diligent, as we've seen in this committee.
Thank you. Michael.
Congratulations, Chairman, on your election. I knew Michael when I was mayor in 2010-11, and as soon as I walked in this room, he came and said hello, because I haven't been on this committee very long. And the only thing I will say about him is he was a gentleman, and there's not many people I call a gentleman.
Thank you. Grant.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, and congratulations as well. I've been on this committee now for seven years, and one thing I do remember very clearly about Michael was his deep voice. He always had that sort of like presence about him. So from Broadland's perspective, yes, I also wish to send our condolences to his family. Thanks.
So thank you for all those tributes. We will write to the family just to extend the the condolences of the whole committee. Thank you. So we now move on to item 4, which is the minutes of the meeting of Friday the 24th of April. You've got a copy. Right, so is everybody agreed that as regards accuracy, Ben?
I do agree. The accuracy, I note there was a resolution for the chair, and I wonder if there was an update on that resolution.
This is a letter writing to
It was to write a letter, and that's
Yeah, that was the meeting before.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yes,
My bad.
And the letter went out via
Okay,
Tom
fine.
McCabe.
Thank you. Sorry.
So with that comment, all agreed with the correct minutes? Thank you. So we move on to, no further updates from the chair. Are there any disclosable pecuniary interests? There are none. So we move on now to page 14 of your agenda, the Finance and Risk Report. Gary.
Good morning, everybody. So yeah, this is a report which comes to every committee, updating you on our current financial position and our risk register. If we move on to page 15, we're talking about this year's budget, 26-27. It was agreed last year the council would use £25,000 of our reserves to create a one-off saving. And I know there was lots of talk at the last meeting about what happens the year after, but that was a one-off saving because we don't have huge amounts of reserves. So currently that is not in future savings. And then on page 16 is our current financial position. I suppose the big highlight is at the bottom where we're currently showing a £15,000 overspend. A large chunk of this is due to staff absence management savings, which we need to make every year, which we are making some at the moment. It also will be managed down because we currently have a line of budget for temporary staffing for when we have large budget pressures, and some of that money will be diverted to make sure and manage the risk. And then we should reach a balanced budget by the end of the year. I always work on the basis with the NRO budget that because we rely so much on income generation, you know, that completely outweighs this figure, that throughout the year I have to manage the budget based on the risk that we won't achieve our income generation targets. So it is part of the usual budget monthly process to be keeping an eye on income generation before we commit to spend.
Could I ask a question, Gary, just at that point? Thank you for the report, and I'm sure you've much more to say. But I think it's important that at this point, because we've had a lot of new members arrive into the council, is to talk about just fundamentally how much you have been innovative in creating income generation over the time, and also how reliant we are on that income generation to support what is a very, very tight and small budget that you receive.
Yeah, I suppose since I've arrived, I'm coming up to my 13th year now, which is amazing. I can't remember the figure when I arrived, but our income generation targets were fairly small. I think they were about £40,000. And obviously we had budget pressures every year since the financial crash. So one of the things which we've done a lot of work on is increasing our income generation. So now our target is about just over £300,000 a year we raise for income generation. So it's over a third of our revenue budget if you exclude depreciation, the operational budget. And we do that in lots and lots of ways. I would say one of the things we don't do is we don't do things which are outside of our mission. So our mission is we collect, preserve and make accessible archives relating to Norfolk. So all the ways we generate income relate to that mission. So we're not selling cups of coffee and cake and things like that to try and generate income. And there are lots and lots of different ways we do it. Perhaps the largest one is we took over, which wasn't the best way of doing it, the provision of copies of official birth, death and marriage certificates for Norfolk. So all of the registers, which used to be stored in the various little registration offices, came into us, and now people purchase them for us, which takes a lot of staff time, but it does generate over £70,000 a year, sometimes a chunk more than that. We also license to family history websites. There's a tour afterwards, and there's a spoiler here, because I always take people in the box-making room and say, what's this machine for? And Councillor Adams knew straight away, even before I asked. So that was primarily for our benefit, for the preservation of documents and using space most efficiently in the strong rooms, but we do sell lots of boxes. So we bring in, it varies from year to year. Sometimes we get very large orders for multiple thousands of pounds. Sometimes it's just one-offs, but we sell boxes. We have various projects running and partnerships where we have money being drawn down. So we do lots. I mean, the other thing, which I'll go into a little bit more detail in the other report, I reached the point a few years ago where I thought I'm always trying to push and increase the income generation. So I suppose the most recent thing a few years ago is we introduced a digitisation on demand service. We used to provide digitisation, digital photography of documents before, but it involved people emailing us, us doing an estimate, them saying yes, us sending out the digital image and an invoice, and then them paying the invoice. The system now is we have a form online where people can give us the document reference they want digitised, pay us £20 in advance, we will digitise that document and send it to them. If what they've ordered is larger, because I think it's, I can't remember the exact number, 8 images, obviously, so if it's 9 images, we'll probably continue the order. But if it's more, we'll send them the sample images and an estimate of how much it will cost to complete the order, and then they can. So I think it cuts our invoicing down by over 90%, which is good, and it, again, generates significant money. I mean, we also do larger digitalisation orders for people. We take in work from other archives. We've been digitising material for Aviva in recent years for their archive. The thing I'm going to mention more detail later on is I reached the point where our income generation was pushing to near maximum. So we took the decision that we wanted to work with giving. So we've set up a partner charity, Nora, which I'll talk more about later.
Thank you. Saul.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Sorry, Gary, we're keen to get through through your report. Just on the grant income that is forecast for 26-27, so it's obviously quite a big jump from the budget. 135,000 more, although that's probably relatively small in terms of grant income, but it is a big jump relative to the budget. So is that I guess my question is it achievable? Is that focused around one project in particular? And have you got the staff resource to ensure that income, or that grant income, is going to happen?
I mean, a large amount of it, which, remember, two meetings ago, the team came and gave a report on the Hallmarks project, which is a National Lottery Heritage Fund funded project, which is looking at the lost country houses of Norfolk. But it's got a series of activities, including group of wellbeing programs, Saturday workshops to introduce people to research skills in library. And that project will finish at the end of this financial year, so that's a big part of it. We've also got a project, it's not a huge amount, but we joined with a partnership which was applying to the lottery for looking at tribunal records from the First World War. And we have some money from that, and I think we've got a load of volunteers in today working on it. I can't say too much about this, but I did have an email just as I was coming to committee chamber saying we've been successful in another grant application, but it's embargoed at the moment, so I won't say any more. So it should all be accounted for, yeah.
Grant.
Thank you, Chairman. Right, Councillor Thomas, the Cabinet member responsible for the budget. She's in my division, and one of the things that she is reporting to the parish councils is that she's having conversations with the officers about their budget, and I just wondered if there was any impact that it would have on your 26-27 budget, and also then going forward, whether there was going to be any implications. I mean, we've talked about the 25,000 that's being taken out of reserves, and we have expectations for that going forward. Don't know whether it's appropriate to talk about that now, or whether we would be looking at when we get to the risks aspect, but it's a concern of mine that these conversations that are being had with the officers, would they have an impact on our current budget and going forward the plans that you have for the Record Office? Thank you.
I don't think there's much I can say about that, really. I mean, obviously, you would expect budgets to be scrutinised closely, and in fact, I did have a message about the £15,000 reported in here, quite rightly, which, similar explanation, which I've given for how it's going to be managed over the course of the year. But at the moment, I've got no other indications of what's happening.
Any other comments?
Chair, I would like to comment on the risk register, but I would allow Gary the opportunity to finish the report. Thank you.
So if we're about to move on to that, it might be a bit early in the year for all members to have received risk management training, but if there are any who don't fully understand the risk matrix, we can arrange for presentation at the next meeting, so that how we manage that and how we score that. I'm sure we could arrange somebody from the risk department to speak to members.
Probably easiest. What I'll do is I'll run through the risk register, then any questions can come up as we go through it. So the first one's fairly easily because it's income generation targets, which I've just been talking about. So, we're on course at the moment. The monitoring, it's early in the year, but the income is achieving the levels which I would hope, which is positive. Next one, RM 14390, is provision of collection storage space to 2027. This is making sure we have contingency plans in place should we receive any large collections. So, for example, if somebody decides that they want to deposit a lot of local government records prior to local government reorganisation or something like that, we have a contingency plan in place, which basically involves me giving up my office and using it as a digitisation room. And, yeah. But, I have a plan in place. It's good to have a plan in place just to cover that, because I would much rather get records into the office than leave them out of the office where they remain at risk, because important things can be lost that way. The next risk starts with an apology, I'm afraid. It's a ditographic error, which I'm sure Carol and a number of the historians in the room are familiar with. And basically, the same risk has been copied again. But that is instead of a risk which doesn't appear on the risk register. Because this, you'll be able to see how it's done, because this is provision of collection storage space after 2027 should be in the risk register, which relates to the fact that in 2028 we expect the Norfolk Record Office to be full up. Obviously, 2028, we're expecting a lot of pressures. No matter what solution to archives in Norfolk there is, there will still be lots of documents which need to be preserved and saved. So this risk relates to the fact that our space is going to be full up. Now, obviously for the benefit of the newer members, this has been an issue which committee have raised for a long time. Pre-COVID, this was something which was being talked about in this committee. So a project was launched 2021 where we looked at what we were going to do. So in 2023, I brought an options appraisal to this committee, which looked at lots and lots of options. Do nothing, which obviously means we cannot fulfill our mission, but also building a sort of separate storage site somewhere off on the County Hall campus, doing mass digitisation and sending it to deep storage, and looking at an extension to the back of the existing storage block, which would provide 25 years storage space. But within that, we also looked at, we have to achieve fairly strict environmental conditions, temperature, relative humidity, for storage of archives. And we looked at doing like for like we have now, where our existing storage is air conditioned. We don't run the air. One of the ways of saving money over the years has been that we've been learning to drive our air conditioning. So it used to run 24/7, and now we rely on the thermal structure of the building for some of that work, so it runs fewer hours. But we also looked at that. There's been a great development at the Imperial War Museum, Duxford, where they built a passive paper store, and we used that as the basis for one of the options. And that was the option which came out top. That option involved constructing it, filling it with racking, getting the passive-ish controls in. You know, there's some air exchange, but not very much. And then filling it with paper. The idea of filling it with paper is there's a slightly wider range of environmental conditions which are good for paper. Parchment, which is spread for all our collections, is very, very sensitive to humidity. So it gave us a little bit more sort of risk allowance. But that involved, also costed in the project, was a large project to prepare to fill the space. Because if you're trying to do things in a passive way, the actual contents of the building acts as a huge buffer, so it absorbs humidity and, you know, adds to that stability. So that was costed at £5.7 million, but would have been a very nice option. I've done lots of capital build projects. I've built 3 record offices now, and I know the disruption it causes. But yeah, but then in I think it's late 2024, I was made aware by the University of East Anglia that the East Anglian Film Archive, currently housed in the Archive Centre, would not be renewing its lease in April 2028. So that space will become available, which obviously that meant the business case didn't quite stand up. So I brought a report to this committee notifying them of this and saying, I think really, you know, the preferred option becomes the fallback option, but we should look at the East Anglian Film Archive space. So I've been doing work on that over the last 18 months. We've had consultants in to do thermal modelling of the space. And what they've resulted in, space will, you know, because I'm looking at, we have an enormous electricity bill. So if we can get something which is, I don't think we can achieve passive in there, but we can achieve a more semi-passive. And the thermal modelling shows that actually, on occasions in the year, there's a problem with humidity. So what I'm working on now is developing options for, and this is what I reported to committee, on how we can use that space best. And it clearly is a better option than spending 5.8 million. You know, I think we can reduce the cost by at least 4.5 million. So it's a bit of a no-brainer in some ways. Now, the position was that that had all been put in place last year, and there was money allocated to us starting the work on the project, because there's a lot of work to get ready to move all these collections. But I was notified that the original earmarked funds have been reallocated, reprioritised to fund crucial maintenance in the short term, but corporate or property understand the rationale for the project, and the review is ongoing to identify if other existing borrow within their capital code programme can be identified to fund this project over the coming years. So at the moment, I've got various meetings, and I'm continuing to work on developing business cases, to prove the value of the project.
Chair.
Yes, Ben.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to come in on that. So obviously the risk scores you've got here are a repeat from the other risks. So if you could just confirm with that update and the fact that you've got the space coming free shortly, but you've actually got no capital funding to develop out the space at the precise moment, yet we're about to hit our threshold and need that space. How does that affect the risk scores here at the moment, and what is the trajectory of travel on those risk scores? And I suppose at the same time, later I think we will all talk about the impacts of LGR on the record office, and obviously those those massive risks that we have. But if you could just tell us about the removal of that capital and how that's affecting your risk scores at the moment. Thank you.
The risk hasn't been altered, because ultimately I will have space available. It just may not be ideally suited for its purpose. So if there are delays, it may actually cost money, because we would end up having to put things in storage and then move them to temporary location to actually carry out the works which are required. So I've got various meetings coming up after I get back from holiday, and I'll be able to update committee more later in the year.
Thank you. Thanks, Gary, for that. Just wondering whether we, as a committee, or might I suggest a motion that we, as a committee, obviously we're concerned about the removal of that capital, or the potential removal of it, and we as a committee feel that that is essential in securing the space in the former East Anglia Film Archive. So I think we'd think about some wording here, if that's all right with my colleagues.
Sorry, if I can just comment.
I think you might think that's a bad idea.
It's not up to me ultimately. It's a member's decision. But I would say that at the moment, quite rightly, one of the things I've heard from the current council is the importance of having solid business cases, which is quite right. All projects rest on firm business case foundation, and at the moment, there's work going on to look at that business case and double checking it. So perhaps at another next meeting, that might be more appropriate.
Yeah, I think so. I think we should say, though, that we support you in the business case that you are providing in order to secure that space. I'd like that noted, please, if I may, and then we'll come back to it as a motion.
I think there's probably an additional point, which is that the business case is highly dependent on the precise progress of LGR. Ben?
Yeah, just briefly, Chair. I mean, yeah, we can talk about it from both directions with LGR and where we're paused, and we can look at the risk there. But I think I would like to note that that I have concerns about the future storage of records. I appreciate the work that Gary's doing to do a robust business case, and rightly should be challenged by the administration to make sure that it stacks up. But as the time progresses, that risk to future storage and the time frame obviously becomes shorter to deliver the project, and could actually end up costing this council money if they have to do temporary storage or to start moving things in and out of spaces if we reach capacity. So I'd just like to note my concern that the capacity space the project is undecided at this point. That is my concern.
probably worth saying in relation to LGR, until a decision is made by the shadow authorities, you know, I have no say in what the future of archive services in Norfolk is. But a chunk of this project is collection preparation and collection management, is getting it ready for moving. So in some ways, part of this project applies no matter what the outcome of LGR is. Shall I move on to the next risk?
Yep, next risk.
Right, next risk relates to data. Obviously, we're all aware of cybersecurity needs, and I know Norfolk County Council, who provide our IT services, are extremely aware of them and invest heavily in protecting us. But one of the things which we started doing a year or so ago is our catalogue, and you'll hear me use the word metadata later a lot, I suppose. Descriptions of archives, we've got well over 800, nearly 900,000 descriptions in there. And that is essential data for management collection for its access to it. So we thought, well, why don't we put it on a hard disk and put it in the strong room so it's sort of air gapped, I think is the term, isn't it? So, you know, so that's one of the ways we manage that risk. The next risk relates to digital preservation. It's an ongoing task and skills development issue for archivists in that we collect archives in any format, be that paper, parchment, glass plates, negative or born digital. And it opens up a different paradigm when we receive digital deposits, because as some members of this committee will be well aware, when people call it the Norfolk Records Office, I usually correct them and say it's the Norfolk Record Office, because we act as a place of record. That's the sort of fundamental, I'm getting ahead of myself on the reports here, but that's the fundamental basis of why we exist, because we are a place of record. So the archives we hold, we are cognizant of the need to preserve their evidential value. Now, when we receive, say, in many years' time, or not so long, the minutes of this committee, we'll be able to put it in a box or put it on a shelf, and in 20 years' time, somebody can come back, take that off the shelf, and it will be the original, the signed minutes. In the digital world, it's never an original. It's always a copy of it. It's sort of like, this is the only time I ever used the word ontological, I think. But it is that difference between model is. So there's a need to have processes in place which maintain that evidential value, which we are developing. But also, there's this built-in digital obsolescence, which almost seems to exist, where a file from 10, 15 years is a very long time in electronic records. I'm sure some of you will have some floppy disks at home somewhere. And the issue isn't actually the floppy disk, because you can get the ones and zeros off a floppy disk and put it on a server. The big issue is the software which reads that, and the system which that software runs on. So we take an approach of risk management. So the ideal scenario for us is that we will normalise on a open source format. So, we have, I mean, for images, we often use TIFF files, which are non-compressed, but to be honest, I'm not overly worried about JPEGs. I think you'll be able to open them for a long time, even though it's not 100% ideal. But you know, but part of that process is we may sacrifice some of the properties of that file. So the example I always use is if we received from an architect a whole load of CAD drawings, we are never going to be having a AutoCAD license, which we keep updating every year. You know, that would cost too much money. What we would say is, well, we don't need every property, which all the 3D things it can do, but we can preserve that as a open source file format, which sacrifices some of those properties because it creates a stable format, and that's the sort of approach we're taking. We're, I think the next risk is about staff skills, but this is an area for skill development. It's one of the skills prioritised on our service plan for this year. We have a system which we are slowly implementing, where we're using open source software to take the document flow. I see we have a question.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to jump in there. So a little bugbear for myself is that we're here having debate in chamber, and every committee is an important debate, a conversation. There are nuances that happen in debate that are not picked up in the excellent minutes that Lane and the rest of the democratic services put together. There is also a historical record of how local democracy takes place, how debate happens, the nuances of different political persuasions. And in the past I had the bugbear that I wanted to see the districts and the county councils extensive equipment that is used to record these and produce these and put these out on YouTube to be recorded as a digital record into the records office. I think at the time the Conservative administration were not very supportive of such a process. So I just wanted to just sort of bring that back to the committee's memory. You know, for myself, you know, I love history, and if I could have sat down in a history lesson, you know, in the 5th year and looked at how politics was debated in the 40s and the 50s, and you know, had that accessible record there available or earlier, you know, it would have enriched the understanding of the political process. So I wanted to bring that back to the committee's thoughts here at this point, and I wonder if the committee, you know, have any views on encouraging the districts and the county to keep these digital records, which I believe are deleted within a year or so from the YouTube channel, which I find is just quite staggering when you have YouTube channels of you know, influencers or whatever with millions of videos going back tens of years or whatever, you know, and we can't even seem to keep records of our meetings for more than a year. But any views, Chair, or committee?
I just asked the question, what does the county do about archiving YouTube videos?
I don't, as far as I'm aware, I don't think they do, but beyond that, I don't really know. Yeah, because it falls more under Norfolk Record Office. We don't operate a modern record service for the county council. You know, it's sort of, it's outside of my area.
Well, I totally agree with what Ben has to say about that, because I actually went and looked at Broadland and South Norfolk's YouTube channel, and they've only got about 12 or 15 meetings on there. And I'm wondering what happened to all of the other ones. And I think that's very sad that there isn't that retention of those records for future generations to look back on and see, well, okay, that's how politics was conducted in the 2020s.
Saul?
Yeah, just I totally agree. I think I'm quite shocked actually that we don't have a. I mean, I hear what you're saying, Gary, about obviously the policy of the Record Office and not modern records, but that seems to be critical that those modern records somewhere are kept. And if we only keep paper copies of those, we do lose exactly what Ben has just said, that kind of nuance, that passion of debate, and that richness of an archive where, the film, and to be able to hear and see people, I mean, that's priceless, really. So I don't know how we can, what this committee might be able to suggest as a potential way forward, or discussions that might happen within this county council, but also with our district colleagues. Perhaps LGR is an opportunity there.
Catherine?
Well, thank you, Chair. I do agree to a point, but there are vast numbers of meetings, and if we record every single one, how do you find a particular meeting that if we're just recording for the sake of listening to how people conducted meetings, we could maybe do one a year, one full council a year or something like that. But every meeting, there's going to be millions, and if you do look through the YouTube of, well, I looked through the South Norfolk ones the other day, and they're all not even all in date order. I don't think they're all sort of all over the place. But yeah, it would be hard to find a specific meeting that you wanted, you know, if it was something you particularly wanted to look at. But I do agree, it's interesting to see, but I just wonder whether the sheer volume of meetings would be too much to store in perpetuity.
Ben, I'm sure like the final word.
Chair. So I have to come back, right? So, you know, so some colleagues here might find watching Norwich City Council's Audit Committee rather dry. For me, as soon as I get home, I'm breaking out the popcorn and I'm watching it word for word. So my response is that actually every single meeting has a public interest to a certain collection of the public. You know, it could be ourselves here at the Record Office. You know, it can be museums. It could be anything. There's nuances in discussions about decisions, about capital projects, about risk registers that really capture what's going on at the council and the decisions that were made at that time. So there is this kind of historical record of how debate happens, how modern politics functions, but then there is actually that whole kind of process of decision making and investigation. And at the same time, you know, I mean, even my, you know, Google Drive, you know, I've got my 100 GBs, you know, for £2 a month or whatever, you know, it's like, you know, digital storage space for you know, 2 hour, you know, committee meetings put on by each council once or twice a week, ultimately is a small storage space. When you think about how much data backup all the councils do on a daily, nightly basis, how much server space is used, a little bit of storage of digital records is nothing compared to a couple of people doing a Gemini search at the next built data center in terms of, you know, overall kind of, you know, energy usage and storage space and compute power. So I do think there's absolute merit in storing any and all records from all of the councils, from all of the districts and from the county council, because it is in the public interest. Somebody somewhere will find that incredibly interesting and insightful. But and I would go slightly further. I know question is to be raised, but I would go slightly further, and I would ask the committee to ask the chair to take this particular issue up with the administration. But I would let the other member in before making a proposal.
Dr. Morgan, I have the feeling we might have a nascent lottery bid coming here, the public meeting archive. But Victor.
Yes, I'm not going to comment on the politics or the digital storage resources and things like that, but I have to say that as a historian, how politics is conducted and the accessibility of the sources for analysing the conduct of politics is really quite important. And I say that someone just written a couple of years ago about the trying to reconstruct the behaviour of MPs in late Elizabethan parliaments, which I partly related, I'm not sure everyone believed me, which I partly related to their experience in local government and their conduct of affairs in the Shire House, and not using the Norfolk material, Shire House in Norwich. So the conduct of affairs, which is quite different. So we know that when we come to a meeting and recall in the minutes what's recorded in the minutes, and that's a very dry record, as distinct from the repartee, the humour, for example, that you've just been demonstrating. And I think probably historians looking at this period in the future, where people are saying that the conduct of politics has degenerated, as they would see it, you know, having a record to see, well, was that actually true? You know, I can see some future historian setting some benighted PhD student to look at that for 3 years and drive themselves crazy watching these videos, as it were, and assessing them. So certainly from a historian's viewpoint, actually how business is conducted is terribly important.
I think with that we'll move on to the next risk.
May I make the proposal that I ask you to, you know, you've had, you know, feedback from the committee. You've had support for the idea. You've had the historical merit of the idea and the nuance of that. And so I would like to propose that the chair does investigate this with the administration and report back. And I would like to propose that.
I'm happy to second that, Mr. Chair.
Right, we have all in favour then. Right, seems to be.
Thank you.
Perhaps I should delegate this to the vice chair. I think we get the essence of looking deeper, and perhaps we can come back with.
Oh, specifically, if we need to just confirm the wording, is to ask the chair to look at making digital stored copies of committee meetings of this council and to investigate further with the districts for the same process. And that would be the wording. Is everyone happy with that wording?
I think particularly given the context.
To me, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Gary will now want a larger record office.
Well, digital files don't. Well, they do take up space, but not quite as much. But I'll move on. So, collection access data. I'll try and run through these fairly swiftly. Collection access data is access relies on catalogue data, the metadata, which is the essential gateway between the two, and there's never enough catalogue data. So this is meeting sort of user expectations and that. So, and this is largely, I'll talk about this a little bit more in the next report, about lots of our volunteer work. And the next risk is staff skills. I've already talked about this when I was talking about digital preservation, but we do have partly digital preservation, but also the ability to read our documents and to manage them correctly. So there is a way, we need to make sure we have transition arrangements in place where required. And, we do operate on sometimes the impact of staff sickness or people being on leave can be challenging to us. And then the next two relate to LGR, and this is split into two. It's just both of them are raising the issue that when LGR happens, there are lots of records which will need to be collected and preserved and made accessible in both digital and analogue formats. And that is essential. It's a statutory requirement, really. Local authorities have to make proper arrangements for their records. And ultimately, it's very important for a democratic society that decision makers are held to account, be that in analogue or digital.
I'm going to speak first and then ask Ben and Saul. So that final risk on digital records might be deemed to include our recent discussion. And I think actually during this 2-year process of change, that is historically probably the richest snapshot of that type of record. So perhaps we could emphasize the need to record the process.
You elaborate a little bit more. Sorry, I got a bit lost there. That's just, it's Friday.
What, you want me to elaborate further?
Well, sorry, I just didn't follow there. I didn't follow.
All right. So the final risk is local government reorganisation, digital records. So what I'm saying is, as part of that process, we need to include the YouTube or equivalent recordings of meetings that apply to that process, because looking backwards, the historians would like to know why it happened and how it happened.
So you're adding it. You think it should be added into the risk description? Is that what you're?
Well, subject to discussion with the risk managers.
To try and draw a line on that a little bit, I think Yeah, I get the point about, you know, preservation, but I think in the first instance, it's a decision for the administration and the committee secretariat and legal services about what. I have a wry smile because I'm currently reading a book on the history of the American Constitution and original intent. So, and then, if it is determined that there is a desire that these records are preserved, then, speaking as an archivist, what I would probably be saying is, well, you don't want to keep them all. You sample, you select, and you know, obviously you keep this way. but yeah, but that would be. But I think that process needs to come first.
Ben?
Okay, I'll go quickly. Sorry, mate. Sorry, mate. So listen. You know, these risks are high risks. Both the digital analog risk. We've got them scoring. You know, you've got the digital at 16. I guess maybe slightly less precarious than the physical records in terms of transfer, potential disaggregation. And absorption of a huge amount of digital records from the districts in a short space of time. These are all the risks, but these are high-scoring risks currently. I think in the past we've discussed the financial implications and resource implications that LGR will have. Now, notwithstanding the fact that the government are a bit behind with laying the legislation, okay. They're slightly behind, but I would expect between now and the next meeting that process would happen. Also, from my own personal opinion, I think I've said this before, no matter what this council does in terms of spending money on a judicial review, there is no indication whatsoever the Secretary of State has done anything that is legally not proper and in process with the laying of the unitary order. So I fully expect that will be a frivolous waste of council money, and then the judicial review will fail. But so I am working on the principle that LGR will continue and happen very, very quickly. So to turn this sort of around, is I do think that this should be a standing item. I think that LGR should be a standing item on our agenda, notwithstanding I've not looked at the forward work programme, so apologies, Gary, it wasn't attached here or anything, so, or I didn't see, sorry. So I do think we do need a standing item of LGR, because I think by the time we get to the next meeting, we will be much, much clearer of where we're at. LGR will happen, and we need to be getting ready for it really quickly, and I think it's a massive risk, because it's not only the risk of, you know, what we're doing with our files, or whether or not we're disaggregating or absorbing, but you know, but there is a lot of districts involved. There's a lot of moving wheels, a lot of moving plates in this particular situation. I think it's a massive, massive risk. Thank you.
Niall. I would just like to add, as part of the LGR recording of the meetings, storage is more affordable now than it has ever been. A terabyte of storage can cost about £50, and when you're recording in 1080p, that could be 250 hours worth of recordings, which is about 83 3-hour meetings worth, which I think would cover about a year. So for the very small upfront cost of the actual storage, and we're already recording it, so there's no additional cost for more cameras, more microphones, would it be, at least from a cost sense, more efficient to do it now, especially given the increasing pricing when it comes to computer equipment, given the volatility in the current market?
So I'm trying to respond. Would you like me to respond? Yeah, yes. Fair enough. I mean, yes. Yeah, storage is... Yeah, I mean, there's some law about how storage cost decreases by so much every few years. I mean, speaking more generally of digital preservation, it's the main cost involved is the management of that data, and the, you know, migrations, and it's making sure fixity is in place so that you know that they're there. So, yeah, reasonable point about the actual physical storage itself is not too expensive. Yeah.
Mr Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just those last two risks, picking up what Ben was articulating, they are high. Obviously, the current risk score is 16 and then 20. So I'm just wondering whether actually those target risks being green are realistic. Given particularly the last one, the target date is March 27. So just around that kind of uncertainty. I mean, there are other risks in the risk register which are currently amber, and target is amber. So is that a realistic jump from, say, the penultimate one, 20 risk score, down to 4?
It's an aspiration because arrangements do have to be made for these records. I suppose the reason it's so high on the risk register is because my rough estimates at the moment is we could see over 100 cubic metres of documents coming in. And we currently get between 20 and 25 cubic documents in a year. And that risk is added to by the fact that records coming in, things like GDPR apply to them. GDPR states that you should only keep records for, when they're needed. We do have a derogation in place for archives, so if they're being selected because of their historical significance in a public archive like ours, GDPR does not require them to be destroyed, which is another side risk of outside of the Record Office, in that there's a misunderstanding about GDPR, and that quite often people think, I've got to delete it. So one of my concerns is that records get lost in the process. But that means that we do need to make sure records are properly processed and assessed and appraised to be legally compliant, and that is an enormous amount of work. And to be frank, I don't have the staff to do it at the moment, for that extra burden.
I think that's exactly why I was saying that the green is potentially a bit unrealistic, given that high risk and the staff that you've just identified that we don't have. We've got absence of key staff, loss of key staff, and we're having to prioritise staff training in the preservation of digital records. So I don't want a big thing of it, but I just wonder whether that green is just needs looking at.
I think we'd like to sort of summarise and finish this particular discussion.
Absolutely, Chair. It's your chair, and it's your prerogative. I would disagree with that, and I would actually say that it's important that we actually do it as thoroughly as possible. And if there are any salient points that need to be made, they should be made. But I do agree. We want brevity on this. But so my final points for you on this, Chair, would be that I noticed on the actual analogue records section, okay, that we've got no mitigations populated as of yet. So I was wondering if there's an update. I would share Saul's points as well, that I do think that the risk score, the target risk scores are ambitious, particularly with the timeframes that have been set down. I've also made the point previously about resource issues, and you've just reiterated that, Gary. And we've also talked about space. You talked about 100 cubic space, and you take in 25 a year. So of course that turns us back to the film archive space and the risks around future space for records, and maybe the scores on those amber scores should be amplified by the LGR up to red. So there's a point there about the low green target scores. Perhaps the storage space is undervalued, but my final point, and I would like to make a resolution, Chair, is that I would like to see LGR as a standing item on each agenda going forward. So that's my proposal, is that we have LGR as a standing item of discussion at committee.
Yeah, in terms of yes, they are optimistic, but they're optimistic because I think the work does need to be done and a solution does need to be found. Obviously, it will be reviewed as we progress through the LGR process. Just to make a little point, this committee, I've included an LGR section in the next report rather than bringing it as a separate report, and the risk register. So I thought, considering there haven't been significant develops in between, but as you say, I expect things are going to speed up.
So just to respond, I think that's a fair point. The officer has said there's going to be discussion of LGR at the next meeting. So at the next meeting, I will propose that it becomes a standing item then, Chair. And I won't propose it now because we don't need to duplicate report and waste resources of officers. So thank you for confirming that, Gary.
Okay, so the official recommendation is the Norfolk Records Committee is to ask to consider and comment on the forecast position of the revenue, budget, reserves and provisions and the management of risk for 26-27. And if there are further recommendations from the floor, which there are, we have had a proposer, a seconder and a vote. And I think we... Yeah, but I think we have, as a committee officer, you're happy with the wording of that it's clear? Yeah, good. And we will no doubt revisit the risk score of a target of 4 at a future meeting. So on that basis, we move on to item 8, Norfolk Record Service overview. This is it's a good it's a good summary, I think, of what we do and why we do it, and of particular interest to new members, I think.
And the good news is that actually in the last item we've covered lots of things in this report already, so I should be able to spin through it fairly quickly. And then when the meeting closes, all members are invited if they'd like to come for a tour of the record office. Sometimes seeing it in the flesh is better. So, first section, a big question, yeah, what are archives? Because it's not commonly known, and I'm sure you've picked up a lot about archives, but the basic, really important thing is that archives are records which are generated in the normal course of business or activity of an individual or organisation and selected for permanent preservation. So it means they have this evidential value, which is so strong. And then I give in 2.3, it was a UNESCO declaration on archives, and it just stresses the importance of archives for our society. Next section is about the committee and its structure. This committee was formed in 1974. 3.4 talks about our staffing, and our full-time equivalents, and our qualified archivists and professionally qualified conservators. I mean, I think this is a useful report, even though I say it myself for members, just to have the reference and future dates. Next looks at our income generation and our spend. And we've covered the budget, so I won't say any more about that. Section 4, this is a previous committee, I did bring a report on LGR, and this is largely a repetition of that, which talks about statutory basis and the 1972 Local Government Act and the proper arrangements for keeping records, which a local authority has to do. I think the interpretation of proper arrangements is important because that's one of the ways in which, obviously, there's a requirement for records which are being created and stored by local authorities now, which haven't been transferred to us. But one of the ways which those proper arrangements are made is by the Norfolk Record Office looking after them. Yes, as it says in 4.7. A professionally run archive service conforms most closely to the idea of proper arrangements as described in the Local Government Act 1972. 4.9 is freedom of information, which I'm sure everybody is familiar with. Freedom of information, people's right of access to information, and records which are held and made available in our search room, in effect, are easily accessible. So people can come and use them, and we don't have to respond to access requests on them because we make them available. GDPR I mentioned just now, but that's an important consideration. And that derogation I keep stressing. In fact, the letter which was asked about earlier stressed this derogation to avoid that risk of loss of important records. Section 5, I have more practical stuff about what we actually do. So 3 interconnected areas: collecting, You know, we take documents in all the time, lots of different ways. We have transfers, we have gifts, we have deposits, and occasionally there are purchases, but that is dependent on our wonderful partner charity, Nora. So we don't spend our core budget on purchasing documents. 5.4 is something which is really important to the service, is we are a place of deposit for public records. And the public records are those records generated by central government which are deemed more appropriately stored locally. So often things like court records and hospital records and that sort of thing. Part of that is we are a designated archive service, so every 4 years with a 2-year interim review, our designated status reviews. Last year we had our interim status confirmed, but that is a quality standard, if you like, upon which the are acting as a place of deposit and confidence in of our depositors rests. One of the things which does come out quite strongly in that always is the governance of the Record Office and stakeholder consultation, because of what I'm doing at the moment. So 5.6 is just a big figure. 3,000 cubic metres we hold in the building behind us. The statistic, which I'm sure many of you have heard me use before, is if you took all our shelves and put them into a single bay, our building would have to be 23 times taller than the Shard in London, which would be a very long ladder. And then we also run the Kings Lynn Borough Archives, which is paid for by District Council of Kings Lynn, sorry, the Borough Council of Kings Lynn and West Norfolk. And that holds about 25 cubic metres of archives. It's small, and it's a closed archive. In fact, it's the pre-1974, very, very, very pre, in some cases, 1974 records of Kings Lynn. You know, it's a fantastic medieval archive. And skipping over the designation, the next bullet point, it was announced recently, the Red Register of Lynn, which is held there, has been inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage Register recently, which is a recognition of its significance as the earliest paper archival book in the country. So it starts, I think, 1300. We are planning to have a conference in partnership with Nora in Kings Lynn in November about medieval Lynn. More will be announced. 5.8 for digital records. I think I've covered that already. But, you know, it's low at the moment, about 2 terabytes. Not a huge amount, but it is going to increase. There's this lag between, between records being created. So there used to be a 30-year rule, but that's been slowly reduced to a 20-year rule. But it is between 20 and 30 years, which things come to us. Not ideal for that delay in the world of digital preservation, though, because that's a very long time in the digital world. 5.9 and 5.10 I covered earlier about expansion space in 5.11. So on to preserving. So our documents represent over 900 years of Norfolk's history. I think about 1090 being our earliest documents. And I view it in different ways, but basically we have a trust from future generations to look after those things, so they're available for, when I talk about long-term preservation, I'm talking about centuries, if not millennia. You know, when we select these for preservation, it's permanent. I know permanent's impossible if you want to stretch the point, but yeah, that's what we're trying to do. So we achieve this in 2 ways. Active conservation. If you come on the tour, you'll see our conservation studio where we can repair documents and we can strengthen documents and we can make them suitable so they're accessible. And perhaps the largest, I don't like to make comparisons, but the passive preservation is where we try to slow down the inevitable aging process as much as possible. So if the figure I use for how many documents we've got is 10 million. And if you've got 10 million documents and it takes a week to conserve each of them, I'll let you do the maths. So, slowing down that deterioration. And there are lots of ways we do that. We use microenvironments, which is making sure they're packaged properly and using archival materials. The macroenvironments are the conditions, the relative humidity and the temperature, and also protection against, fire risk and things like that. Obviously, fire risk is very pertinent to the Norfolk Record Office because of the fire in 1994. But I always like to stress that the Record Office didn't lose any records during that fire, because I keep on reading we lost the whole collection, but we didn't. Some of them got a bit soggy. Digital preservation I've already talked about. So the final one, which is really, really, really important, obviously, is making all this material accessible. It's there for people to use. We do provide digital access. A good example is the Second Air Division Digital Archive, which you can go online and browse through. The Second Air Division Trust paid us to digitise most of their records and put them on a website. But it's about 3% of our collection is digitised, and that percentage goes down every year because we get in far more records than we're going to digitise. So ultimately, search room access is really, really important. And at the moment, we're at the stage where 5.22 looks our opening hours, and they've been reduced over the years. Thursday and Friday now is a sort of advanced booking only, a limited service, which has bedded in, not as popular as Tuesdays and Wednesdays when you can just turn up. We advise people that they should book in advance to guarantee a seat, but we have lots more people on Tuesdays and Wednesdays where people can come in, order documents on demand rather than having to have them in advance. One of the ways we increase that access in 3.5.23, we have this thing we call UFP, which is unfit for production, where documents would be damaged and the risk of loss of information if they were handled by the public. So we make arrangements for people, sometimes in the conservation studio, where the conservators will lay the documents out for them so that they can have access to them. Catalogue, I warned you I'll be using the word metadata later, but this is the huge amount. I mentioned this over one of our data risks. There's nearly 900,000 descriptions in our catalogue, but there could be millions and millions and millions more. We're very keen on linking data and making data accessible to the modern world. I came to this committee about 10 years ago, I think it was, talking about when we were migrating our cataloguing system from COM to Atom. One of the things I said in the report was, well, in the future, we're probably going to see users of our data not being human beings for the first time. I wasn't anticipating that was going to happen quite so quickly. That catalogue data, I can't overstress the importance of it for the access to the collection. We also do a lot of work in education, outreach and well-being, where we are raising awareness of the collection, developing people's skills to use it, because archives aren't that easy to use. They weren't created, their very essence is they weren't created for you to do research. They were created for why they were created at the time. But also, people don't appreciate what they can find from an archive. We work with schools, and I'll be talking a little bit more about well-being, different section, but one of the areas we've had funding for different projects where we work using archives to improve people's well-being. We've had something, the most recent one was a project we had called Inquiring Minds, where we worked with a partner charity and received funding where we used archives, working with people, targeting the charity we're working with specialises in mental health, and we used their clients, and we used a sort of 6-session course where we were trying to improve digital literacy. So we're using archives as examples and then leading up to a modern day example of the digital world. Our volunteer programme, currently on our core volunteer programme, we've got 97 volunteers engaged who are busy indexing and cataloguing and cleaning documents, writing blog posts. I have a link here. I recommend our blog site. We've got some good new ones being added soon.
Gary, thank you for everything so far. I just would like to ask you to just to give us a minute or two of explaining how essential the volunteers are and how much the service relies on that volunteer core to help deliver the work you do with the tight budgets you have. I'm sure you were going to go into more, but please.
Volunteers add additionally to the work we do. They do not replace paid staff. Yeah. But they do things we wouldn't be able to do otherwise. So there are some examples in here. So there was a long-running project, the Horner, the collection from the family land agents. Yeah, there were 1,228 plans, which are like lots of plans from the 19th century, covered in soot. Yeah, and we had a long-running volunteer program which used vulcanized sponges to clean them all. You know. We wouldn't have done that. Great material in there. There's that metadata supplementing our catalogue on 5.32. I've talked about, you know, some statistics in there. 11,000 building control plans. And this is, you know, back to metadata again. If you go to our catalogue before this project, it would have said Norwich Building Control Plans, Box 73, 1923 to January 1924. That's it, you'd have to go for the whole box, so you might. But now they're individually listed, so you can look at the catalogue and see if the building you're interested is in any of those boxes. Yeah, 20,000 names, the jail registers. Again, you know, Great Yarmouth Jail registers, 1783 to 87, full stop. Now it's got details of who's in there. St Andrew's Hospital cases, exactly the same applies. So it really it opens up the access. So it's almost like people can stumble upon. One of the things which I'm hoping to share this metadata more widely so that people will find it more easily through some other sources. So without that, we wouldn't be able to do that sort of work.
Chair and Gary, just to come back in, and can I just ask you about the other side of it, like the experience for the volunteers? I mean, obviously we're not here to comment about individuals, but I imagine that there's a lot of community and well-being that is created by being a part of a volunteer process, so that the volunteers also get a lot out of it for themselves?
Yeah, we do things to thank our volunteers quite often, and that sort of community. In fact, I'm afraid this meeting has run quite a long time, but so we'll miss them when we go on the tour, because we've got a group of young people in, 6 young people working on the Grounds for Appeal project, so 8 young people. They're in there today, and they're doing the indexing of the appeals process for service. We also run it used to be called the Seal Sock Sewing Group. So it's difficult to say, but it's a document packaging cleaning which works as a group, so they get together for once a month, so people get a lot out of it, yeah. The volunteer bloggers actually get a lot out of it, so yeah. And we have a Christmas party, which Michael used to come to, so thank you to them all. So shall I move on? So, the Norfolk Archives and Heritage Development Foundation, NORA. Easier to say NORA. This is the charity I mentioned earlier, which raises money and issues grants for the objects which I've put here, purchasing Norfolk's archives, preserving and engaging with Norfolk's archives. It's an independent charity, but we do work closely. In fact, the chair of the Norfolk's Record Committee is an ex-officio member of trustee of NORA.
Perhaps you'll let me know their meeting days.
Don't worry. Yeah. So since it was founded about 10 years ago, it's about £70,000 of grants have been issued by NORA, and it has provided. Sometimes that leverages in. I mentioned how looks like that notification we've been awarded a grant earlier. Well, NORA provided match funding for that grant application, so it sort of levered in 20 times what they have put in, it's assisted with. So, it's been very useful. Then I've got a few projects I'd just like to highlight. There's Change Minds, which members of this, I'm very keen on Change Minds. Change Minds is a project which uses records from the county, used to be in the 19th century, called the County Lunatic Asylum. wouldn't call it that now, but it's a 12-session course which works with people often with severe mental ill health, and they take a patient records from the 19th century, research that person's life inside and outside the asylum, you know, treating the person as the whole. They're not defined by being in their stay in the asylum, and then engages in creative responses to their own experiences and the person they've researched. And it's, you know, it's been very, very, very well received. The project won our partner, we work with an organisation called the Restoration Trust, a partnership we've developed together, but they won a Welcome Award for the project. I did a speaking tour a number of years because lots of people wanted to hear about it. So in 2021-22, we received another grant from the lottery where we had a project called Scaling Up Change Minds, and we really short version is it was franchise inspired. So it was thinking about how we can get other people running Change Minds projects without having, you know, in the most efficient way possible. And since then we've had projects all over the country basically. Yeah, I had another person contact me yesterday saying they're putting in for funding, and they pay me, the record office, to support them whilst they're delivering their projects, and I pay for my evaluation and my I give them training and that sort of thing. But it's, you know, it's the evaluation is always very good, and there's some very powerful sort of like stories in the evaluation about, you know, people who haven't been out for years getting on a train to go and visit the grave of the person they've been researching. So, yeah. Hallmarks, I mentioned earlier. This is a £250,000 lottery grant, which we're looking at the long shadows of Norfolk's lost country houses with lots of these elements. And this has got a huge volunteer element. We're aiming to transcribe 500,000 lines of data using volunteers. So part of the project is bringing those volunteers together using in-person and online volunteers. 5.41, community archives, skills support and sustainability. Project, again, lottery funded, which started in April 2020, something else was happening then as well, I think. Caused a few problems in that we had to reframe the project so we could do it all remotely because of lockdown. Project went really well. In some ways that benefited because lots of things were delivered by video, which we then saved. But that is part of our strategic thinking about how we benefit the wider archive community of Norfolk, not just the stuff we look after. It was also about lots of community archive, very good community archive out there. Tens, if not hundreds, of community archives around Norfolk. They used to approach us saying, can you help us? And it's sort of, well, we don't have the resources to sort of help on a one basis, so we created a toolkit. And that's there on our website, and does get used around the country and beyond. And then unlocking our sound heritage, which we were a hub for a British Library centred project, and we digitised thousands and thousands of hours of digital recordings. We hold sound archives, so tapes, digital audio tapes, mini discs, cassettes, records. Yeah. And part of that is we could update some of our studio equipment as well, so there's a long legacy from the project. And then finally, local government reorganisation. I think I've probably said enough about proper arrangements and when we talked in the risk register, so I won't say anything more there. And that is the end of my report, Chair.
Thank you, Gary. I think that's a good introduction to what a wide range of subjects and activities this are reported back to this committee, and what makes it a successful service. Any particular questions on that report? Saul?
Just to comment, really, thank you very much for that, Gary, and I think on behalf of all of us, thank you for the fantastic work you do in leading that service, so well done.
So the recommendation is that the committee notes the contents of the report and uses it as a reference for understanding the scope and direction of the Norfolk Record Office. can all agree with that. So with that, that is the final item on the agenda. So thank you all for your time today. The next meeting is to be held on Friday the 23rd of October at 10:30, when I shall be a year older. I declare the meeting closed.
And as I said earlier, if anybody